I'm Sam Witters. I'm CEO of SW & Partners. I'm really excited to be here to talk about storytelling in VR and what that means. And when people say, what is VR? What does it mean? We've been telling stories and narratives and journeys and safety for like 250,000 years. Follow the path, don't fall off the cliff. VR lets you fall off the cliff. So it's pretty exciting. We've got three pioneers here, as I said, to talk about what they've been doing. We've got Nathan Brown, SVP for Discovery Studios, New Media, Digital Development, Digital Networks. We've got James Milward here from
Secret Location,
Halcyon, Sleepy Hollow. And we've got Neil Graham here from Sky VR Studio. So rather than talk about it, I'm going to get ready and show you exactly what we're talking about. Nathan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks for everybody for being here. We're going to start out with a clip. It's a compilation video of different things that we've shot over about 120 different pieces of original pieces of VR content that we've produced and distributed. And so you'll get a pretty good example of all the different things that we're shooting at Discovery VR.
Shark Week will never be the same, right? And James, would you like to talk a little bit about Secret Location and show your clip?
Sure. So I'm James Milward, the president and executive producer of Secret Location. We've been creating content for emerging platforms for 9 years, obviously pre-VR, everything from full-frame web to apps to installations. And we discovered VR 3 years ago when we got the Kickstarter from Palmer Luckey and started toying around with it. We've been really fortunate to make a lot of different types of content, from 360 video and documentary content with the United Nations and Samsung and Frontline on PBS, all the way through to full narrative content. I'm going to show you a couple clips. They're 2 30-second back-to-back clips that will go with a show we just finished called Halcyon, which is with Sci-Fi International. So that's gone out around the world with Sci-Fi's channels on broadcast, digital, and VR as one consolidated narrative that sort of plays interspersed between each other.
Thank you. And Neil Graham, head of Sky Studios VR.
Hi there, I'm Neil Graham, exec producer for Sky VR Studios. I first discovered VR and 360 cameras about 4 or 5 years ago when I was working on the Sky Cinema side and was looking for new ways to bring our viewers closer to the films on our channels, and discovered 360 cameras, which seemed to me just this amazing tool. You can suddenly have grown up loving movies all my life, and suddenly you feel like there's a possibility you could place yourself inside the movies as an observer. So we did a little bit of experimenting, and we took a bigger leap forward a couple of years ago when Sky invested in Jaunt, a Silicon Valley-based VR company who produce software, content, and cameras. And since that time, we've been monitoring the technology and the content very closely, and we felt that the beginning of this year was the time to set up a formal production studio. So that was back in February this year, working across all of the genres of content Sky has to offer. So we were set up to experiment and to produce high-quality content in sports, news, drama, comedy, cinema, the arts. Performance in the arts really lends itself to VR, we found. And so we got to the stage where we felt like we produced enough and made very close relationships with for everyone from the smaller boutique companies to the tech giants and to companies like Discovery and Secret Location. And with all that content coming together, we felt that we wanted to quickly put it all in one place, which has become Sky VR, Sky VR app, which is now the home of our content, which is a mixture of our own content, commission content, and third-party content. And this reel is just showing you a bit of what we've produced in-house, as well as some of the other great VR content out there.
So, challenges. What does VR bring versus linear narrative and coherent narrative? What has been the most difficult thing, or do you think that they exist alongside each other very well and complement each other? And James, I'll get you to start that, given Halcyon has 5 pieces of VR content and 10 episodic linear pieces of content.
Yeah, so I think the number one question we ask ourselves when we're endeavoring to deliver a story or to figure out how to create a story and the right platforms for it is to ask ourselves, like, why is the story going to be meaningful in this format? So for us, when we looked at the opportunity we had with Sci-Fi International, what they were looking for in terms of a format, a content format, we decided that if we were going to tell a story that had a VR aspect to it, we wanted to lean into VR as part of the narrative, because we're at such an early stage right now in the development of the platforms and the technology and the user and audience experience that we didn't want to have to sort of bring an adjacency to VR and hope that people got it. We sort of created a world that included VR as part of it or fundamental to it. And that allowed us to create story hooks that didn't have to stretch the why of going into VR. It just was an element of the storytelling that made sense to dig into, hopefully. So the idea with the show is that it's a procedural, although this is sort of one 50-minute content block that's broken up into 10 5-minute episodes that goes on air. And then the VR is the crime scene of the murder, and you go into the crime scene in full game engine 360 VR, where you can grab stuff and pick stuff up and evolve the narrative, and then you're able to go back and forth between the episodes and watch how the characters or the detectives disseminate the murder and how you've collected evidence and sort of help that. So for us, when looking at what storytelling in VR meant, we had to sort of honor the things that have made traditional storytelling really good. Obviously characters, pacing, arc, structure, and at the same time I had to sort of work with new conventions that we discovered and had to create in terms of what that actually, or what those elements meant once you were in a participatory experience, once you could actually pick up things and move the story along or not move the story along. And so, we've been tackling a lot of those issues in other formats of digital media for a while, so we had some places to start, but we really had to just sort of step back and continually create in an iterative way. So that's, I think, also something that isn't necessarily talked about a lot, which is that, at least for us, we've seen having to tell stories by telling shorter, more concise versions of that story in rougher and rougher forms and putting it in front of people as quickly as possible to just make sure they understand what's going on, let alone enjoy it. And then once we get to a good feel and a flow, then we can start building on the layers of quality and finishing that ultimately creates the piece at the end of the day.
Thank you. Nathan, over to you. Discovery's been taking us, deep down into the sea, exploring spaces, we haven't seen before. How does VR fit that, and how does it inform your overall content strategy?
Well, I think I'm lucky. Discovery, as we all know, is a brand that's been around for over 30 years now, and we have a rich reputation and of bringing people throughout the world to exotic places through their television and really telling great stories in that way. And now with VR, we're really able to sort of do the inverse and bring these exotic places around the world that people couldn't otherwise visit or hear these stories and bring those experiences to them through their headsets. And so, you often hear about VR referred to as the empathy machine, right? And so, hopefully everyone here has experienced VR, and it truly does have that profound effect of actually having presence in a place that you otherwise couldn't be. And so for us, as a mission to really lean into technology and to lean into great stories, I think VR just sets it up as a platform, sets up perfectly for the Discovery DNA.
So that's a really good point you make. I mean, storytelling is often reflexive. It's looking back. VR, immersive content, is very much in real time. Do you think it's more suited to any particular type of genre? You and I, Neil, talked about sport, for example, and boxing, and I know we had a clip to show. Would you like to pick that up a bit?
Yeah, that's a really good example, actually, because when we set out to work out how we could apply VR to all of the genres across Sky, we were not only looking at the individual genres, but within those genres, what lends itself to VR and what you as a viewer can get out of it. And the boxing example that you've seen, that you saw in that clip, was Anthony Joshua as he was becoming world champion for the first time. We did experimentation across probably 5 or 6 different sports, but boxing, partly because, one of the key things with VR is the proximity to the action, to give you a real sense of presence. If you were filming this conversation, you'd probably want to have the camera right there so you could feel like you're...
we should actually have a...
Yeah, we should.
Why don't we?
Where is it?
There are actually headsets under all your seats if you want to have a look. No.
And with boxing, there are 2 elements of proximity. One is that we had the access to get the cameras on the corner of the ring, and of course you're not that far from the action, the boxes are right there. But also with boxing, the crowd, the proximity of the crowd to the ring itself creates that incredible sense of atmosphere. And I've only ever been to one boxing fight in my life, and the experience, I mean, it's a visceral experience, and you're being that close to the action is incredible. And actually, you may have picked up there, we did a short documentary with Anthony Joshua across a few of his fights in the road to becoming world champion. And it's short, we're going to the longer version, but it's in only 3.5 minutes, by placing the viewer in a number of different environments, with him training, with him in the dressing room. You saw one of the shots there as he was walking into the ring. We mounted a VR camera on top of the Steadicam that was coming down with him. And that's a view that you never see. You know, you can, with traditional filmmaking, TV making, you know, there's established use of close-ups, cutaways, you know, all of the different tools that you use in the grammar of TV making. You don't have those same tools, but the main tool is proximity to the action. And everything in boxing, the proximity is there, and the atmosphere is incredible. And so you get, one of the big questions with VR is, how interactive does it have to be true VR? And I think the Anthony Joshua fight is one of the most immersive experiences I've seen, purely because of the setup. It feels like the action, the theatre is taking place around the camera.
Are we able to show that? Do we still have? Right, well, that's a really unusual form of boxing from New Zealand, where I'm from.
But actually, that's quite an interesting example of
Thank you.
Of content that goes hand in hand on how you apply it, because that's rushes that we shot on a development trip to New Zealand, because we were looking at the haka, and we thought that the haka would be a great subject for VR, because you see it on TV, you see close-ups, but could you imagine as if you were actually standing right in front of the All Blacks as they're doing the haka? And then the more we looked into it, so the directors that were working with a company called Surround Vision had gone out to do to shoot some test footage, and as we were developing it, we realised that the legacy behind the haka and the origins of the haka, it's an incredible story, and you get this. There's an incredible documentary to be made on the side that actually is perfect subject matter for VR, because you're constantly surrounded by this action. It's a different way to the boxing, but again, it's
visceral sense,
yeah,
being
yeah,
in
yeah.
front of you, the immediacy of
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's picking those experiences. And the clips that we brought that we're showing you are what called equirectangular. So it's the spherical video stretched out on the single plane, and I mean it gives you a good idea. But when you're in a headset and you're looking at it and the action's there, it really is incredible, and it just gives you a sense of presence, and it's a new experience that. I think everyone at the moment is finding that VR, to most people, when you show them for the first time, it is a new experience, but we can't rely on it being a new experience and having that wow factor for too long, so we need to keep developing it.
I think it's a really good point. And you talked about the lexicon and the grammar that we refer to, the language of VR and what that means. And I think at the same time, not only are we taking interactivity in audiences into greater and more participatory spaces, we're creating a kind of a new language around all of this as well. And I think I'm interested to know what you think. I mean, as our legacy from gaming, we talk about the fourth wall and breaking down that fourth wall. Do you think that, you're just taking a kind of poll in the audience, how many here are from distributors? Storytellers? What would you say to some of these storytellers if they were starting? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think that point about, certainly if you're filming in real time, the point about proximity is key.
Yeah.
One of the main things actually that I think a lot of storytellers maybe think that if you haven't had experience of VR before, maybe think that it's very complicated to shoot, but there are reasonably cheap cameras that just have the Ricoh Theta and Samsung Gear cameras that you can just pick up for a couple £100 and go out and experiment. But I think basically what we've been talking about is finding subjects where presence is central to the experience, and really thinking about why, how you're viewing it and why you're viewing it, whether you're a passive observer. Which for the traditional content that Sky Film or Hollywood film, you're used to being an observer, and there are experiences where being an observer, it feels natural. If it's well shot, it feels natural to be letting the action take place around you. But I think a lot of the work that you've probably been doing, where you're interacting with the content. That's where game engines are very important, because they allow you to interact with the space and move around. And when you're talking about real-time rendering, then you have the ability to affect the story and the path of the story. And then you're sort of moving on the spectrum towards gaming. And at what point does it become a game or not? That's where we're starting
James,
to
do you want to pick
experiment.
up on that?
Yeah, well, I think using the word spectrum is a really helpful way of thinking about it. So on one end of the spectrum, you have a very the closest to linear, which is essentially just taking a camera and shooting 360 degrees. The audience doesn't have the ability to participate other than where they look. They can't move their perspective. They can't change anything. It's a fully baked linear experience. It just has 360-degree perspective. And, Facebook 360, YouTube 360, Google Cardboard, these are the gateway drugs to the larger version of what's possible in VR. And I think that truthfully, as much as there are the end of the other spectrum, which I can get into in a second, I think that there's a lot of use cases and a lot of really excellent executions that we can do with 360 and 360 3D video, and using the tenets of traditional storytelling to just tell really great stories in that format, and giving you the sense of presence, giving you the ability to be somewhere you wouldn't be able to be or want to be. We put a 360-degree camera in an Ebola hospital in West Africa, and it was a really amazing experience. There's a huge amount of empathy to being there, and at the same time, I would never really want to be there. And so the ability to transport myself there gave me an ability to step into something that I wouldn't have necessarily had the experience to do. The other end of the spectrum is this really, real-time rendered things happening in response to what you are doing, and potentially even what other people are doing in a social environment. That's further out from being realistically possible to execute at the highest level today. There aren't really any good examples today of truly interactive narrative happening other than in hardcore console gaming that is being sort of ported over or transported over. And I think that you'll see in the next month, 2 months, and we'll see after Christmas, how big that adoption of the Sony PlayStation VR is, because that's the platform that's pushing the limits of that type of storytelling, but fundamentally coming from the gaming side. For us, where we're most interested is in the sort of middle of that spectrum, where you're able to participate in a story to a degree, but you might not be able to completely change that story. This might not have 19 hours or 47 hours of open gameplay. This isn't going to cost $100 million to produce. This isn't Call of Duty or Fallout 4. This is an interesting segment in the middle where VR has a unique use case. And in the last few weeks, Jon Favreau, the director, released a project called Gnomes and Goblins, and it's just a short teaser right now, turning into something larger. But to me, that sort of started to crystallize a format that we're doing a lot of work in, where you have characters, you have potentially animation, you have non-live action elements, but the story is told in a way that defines the experience, and the experience is defined by the story. And then we can start to pepper in live action as we get the capture technology that isn't currently there. And that's one of the things that I think might be just really critical to outlay. There's other panels that are going to talk about process, but the tools to create all of the storytelling potential along that spectrum are not there yet today. So the ability to put a live action actor who is somehow responsive to you into a game engine and have a narrative told at a high level, it's just not there yet. And so we have to sort of dig in along that spectrum with the tools we have to try different things and iterate, and hope that we can create those storytelling mechanics so that as the technology evolves, we are then ready and able to accentuate those at the highest level.
Thank you. For the storytellers out there and those looking for funding, Nathan will speak to you about this. Tell us a little bit about the commissioning. Are you commissioning? Where are you finding your content, your ideas? What would you say about getting funding and licensing and the transactory nature of VR? Is it there yet? No, but what do you think is going on?
Sure. We're just like a lot of companies like Sky, I know, and a lot of other large distributors. We just started making VR. We had an opportunity, we had an ambition to really push storytelling and technology. And to kind of go back to your earlier question, we didn't sit around and wait for a strategy necessarily to start making things. We just went out and made it. And so if you are a creator interested in making VR, just go do it. And you'll learn through your mistakes, just as we did. You know, we've made bad VR, we've made good VR, and we're making more good than bad. But I would say just go out and do it. In terms of, you know, do we deficit finance our own content? Do we produce our own? The answer is we do a little bit of everything. You know, we do have a budget that we use to deficit finance. We do have an internal VR studio that we're producing content with every day around the world. But we're also working with, you know, we're not, you know, arrogant or ignorant to think that we can do everything better than anyone else, right? So there's fantastic studios out there that we're working with. You know, certainly I'm sitting next to a very talented gentleman here and what they're doing. So we are constantly looking for great partners that we can partner with to produce and continuously push the boundaries. And then I think to the last part of your question about, you know, ultimately this does. If you are pushing the boundaries and you are on that end of the spectrum where things are starting to be expensive to produce, you know, there has to be some form of monetization, at least a roadmap to monetization, right? So, you know, as a distributor, we're constantly looking for ways to mine that. I think transactional revenue doesn't make a lot of sense currently in the VR model. There's just not enough consumption yet to really warrant transactional revenue that's truly meaningful. So the way that we've had a lot of success is working with brand partners to underwrite or to sponsor the content that we're doing. Great partners like Toyota and Gillette and others. So for us, that's been a really powerful way to have content funded. And I think now, you know, you'll start to see transactional, like TVOD actually will take place, and you'll see some subscription models as well. And we're pursuing all of the above.
Thank you. Can we talk a little bit about distribution also? Because I think that's quite important. Would you like to lead that off?
Sure. So primarily Discovery VR, it's our app. You know, our goal is to be ubiquitous. We're on all the major platforms, obviously iOS and Android, but you'll find us on Gear and PlayStation and Daydream and Oculus, and we just went live on Viveport. So we want to be everywhere. And we've got, like I said, you know, I think it's around 120 pieces of content that we're distributing. You know, we need to be front and center when people think of VR. They think of discovery. So we're distributing everywhere that we possibly can at all times.
Do you think there's a particular genre that is more suited to VR than others? Do you think, Neil, I'm going to pass that one over to you.
Yeah, I think, well, at the moment, I think there are some genres that are suited to VR. As I was saying, sports and arts, performance and arts are really suited to VR. Music. We did a commission with the English National Ballet on
That's interesting.
Tell us Giselle. So the English National Ballet, who work with Sky Arts quite frequently, they were putting on a brand new performance of Giselle, which is a traditional ballet, but they were this one was choreographed by Akram Khan, the modern dance choreographer, and working with Tamara Rojo, who's one of the world's foremost ballerinas at the moment, and they created, and they're creating basically creating a new type of ballet, and so we spoke to them with a company called Factory 42, who've just set up producing VR and worked out how we would like to shoot a VR experience for this modern day ballet, and so rather than shooting the actual ballet itself, because it was still in development, it's just launched, still in development as we shot it. We took one of the segments of the ballet off the stage and into this factory location. There was a very brief clip of it, and we were looking. As we were taking it off the stage, we were also thinking about ballet and the movement and the story that's being told and how we could accentuate that. So we used a new technique, this point cloud photography of the factory itself, and then shot her individually, put her back into the environment, and motion tracked all of her moves so that she creates these sort of smoky swirls. As she goes around, she's dancing for her dead lover at that point in the play. So it's this really eerie sort of emotional experience as you're watching it. And working on projects like that was A, it was unique because the ballet itself was non-traditional, and B, it was something that the VR actually came first. So the ballet Giselle at the moment, because it's only just starting on theatres, it's not yet on Sky Arts. We don't know if it will be on Sky Arts, but we like the VR aspect of it so much. We thought, well, there's worth here, and that almost flows in reverse, because a lot of the other content that we're looking at our whether it's sports or high-end dramas or our comedies, We're working with the commissioning teams in each of those areas to look at which ones will lend themselves to VR, where are the unique stories, and how can we tell individual stories around each of those. And we shot, our drama team are currently working on a big commission called Britannia, which is set back in Druid Stonehenge times, and that's one of the first pieces of drama that we shot. We were shooting a few weeks ago, this Druid scene at Stonehenge, and although we say that you shouldn't make someone watching VR to look right round them in every direction, shooting in the centre of this Stonehenge, this incredible set, was particularly effective because there was an incredible sort of Druid sacrificial scene taking place. We could work with a production company to get the cameras exactly where we wanted them. We weren't working around other cameras at the time, and that's the key. I think a lot of bad VR has been shot where the VR camera has been put in the position that's out of the way of the traditional cameras, and that doesn't work because you're not close enough to the action. So everything came together there. We had this incredible 360 set and environment, some visceral action taking place, and working with a commissioning team and a production company who were fully supportive of VR. And that's so important. If VR is just a sidebar to what's going up to a traditional production, it's not going to work. So actually carving out time in the schedule, or carving out, and I mean you've done a lot more of it with Halcyon. It's so important to be shooting just for VR.
So just to pick up on that, James, with sci-fi, it'd be really interesting, I think, for the audience to listen to a little bit about the approval process, the writing, the support you got. Was that a commission, a co-production? How did it come about?
Yeah, so we've been doing VR for about 3 years. We did a big project about 2.5 years ago at Comic-Con for the TV show Sleepy Hollow. It was a parallel storytelling experience. We were upstream with the show runners and creators, Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi, along with Fox. So we had the support of producers and the studio and the network, which is critical. We were able to go down and shoot in North Carolina with the actor, and we defined a new technique for capturing that actor and bringing them into a CG environment. It was all really complicated. We did it really quickly. And that ended up winning the first Primetime Emmy last year for VR. And so as a result, the only reason I say that is because right now there's not really a lot of ways that a broadcaster or a studio can sort of ensure that the people they're doing business with aren't going to, screw it up. So we had an ability to sort of use experience to sort of build that trust. And when Sci-Fi came to us with a specific opportunity, namely that their premium content was bought from the US, was 44 minutes, and oftentimes in the international territories they would have sort of like a 50-minute content block. So they needed some minutes, an hour, along with their premium content to make a meaningful audience experience instead of just internal promos or people going to the bathroom. So we had the ability to, basically build a backdoor pilot out of 5-minute chunks that could turn into a 50-minute episode. So we built that episode structure and built the narrative and pitched them. They liked one of the concepts. We developed it. We wrote some scripts for VR and for the linear. And then they came in with a license agreement for their territories, and we came in and used some of our amazing Canadian funding to fill the hole. And we have a distributor in Entertainment One who filled another hole in terms of wanting to be a participant in how that was distributed in the territories that weren't theirs, and also for linear. And so we were able to sort of put together a package that allowed us to go make something that was pretty new and novel. And then we have gone with a sort of a transactional model in VR. So selling the linear 10 episodes and the VR as one consolidated VR package at a transactional level, and then licensing the linear to territories who want just short form linear, and in other ways licensing the VR to territories that want the VR exclusively. And it's an interesting process to see that go, because I think we've also been able to push the series format up to TV. So we have UCP who's optioned the series from us and is working that, which then has sort of digression issues around the existing format, around what you can exploit with it. But those are good problems to have. So for us, the model was really to step in, try something new, just hack away at the financing to get it to a point where we could get the right level built. beg, borrow, steal, kill to make something as good as possible for that money, have it as a showcase, and then use it to amplify both the transactional value of it and ultimately the value of the property over the long term.
I think it's really interesting. Thank you, Nathan, to your point about you've just got to keep doing it and go out there and do good VR and bad VR, and predominantly you get better and better and better. I think I talked to you on the phone before this about the VR incubation period within Discovery and how you got that expertise and how that developed, and how that's infiltrated a lot of your kind of content programming. In terms of storytelling, did you already have in-house commissioners? Did you go out-house to look at them? Has it been hard finding talent? I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry is still relatively immature. So, I think it favors the bold and people that are aggressively pursuing this. And I think we see that it was very evident at Discovery as well. Basically, we had an internal creative agency that was very bullish about VR and just really leaned forward and just sort of became the de facto VR creative studio for us. So we just started buying as much gear as we possibly could and sort of arming them with the resources they need and the funding they needed to go out and make content. And then, you start to see all the different networks and the commissioners and the programmers seeing this interesting VR content. And then you really started to see a lot of inbound interest from producers and people making the programming. Even, something as historically big for Discovery, like Shark Week. Shark Week was, obviously it's one of our biggest weeks of programming, and this year there was so much VR attached to it and so much interest in ways that we could include VR in programming. And so you're really starting to see the industry, even though it is mature, it is starting to evolve and really develop.
So we're on our last 45 seconds. We're not going to take questions, but the guys are going to be outside. If you'd like to go and see them and get each of them commissioning or working for you. Just quickly, VR here to stay, Neil?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing to think about with VR, a lot of people have compared it to 3D, but it's completely different to 3D.
Yeah.
3D was a layer over an existing model, whereas VR, it's a new experience, but it's also a new ecosystem. And the ecosystem has so many uses way beyond content and gaming, education, architecture. It's definitely here to stay. It's a future
James,
model.
this time next year?
Yeah, I think it's here to stay. I think that also, for us, we're not only looking at VR as a silo, and I think that's always the risk is whenever you define something so heavily, it becomes limiting. So for us, virtual reality lives in augmented reality, mixed reality, and the ability to expand how we view content and space and immersion. And that's what I'm particularly interested in. I think VR will continue to evolve and change from its current format. I'm not sure that it will always look the same way or be the same way. But I think that the things we're learning and developing as storytelling structures work well beyond VR as we look to more immersive platforms and formats. The one last thing I would just say, not to suck up the remaining time, but is just, if you look back at the birth of cinema, for the first 5 to 10 years, people just filmed plays. And they didn't have a defined language for that medium until people started having enough time with trial and error and experimentation to start editing and understand that they could not only affect the shot selection, but they could affect time and the perception of time with editing. And that's just one small example that we're still trying to define all of those pieces in VR to help to launch where the format can get to so that it actually transcends being compared to existing platforms and it starts to be its own format of storytelling and art.
Nathan, how bad is Shark Week going to get?
It's going to be scary. Tune in. It's definitely here to stay. There's too much investment in the space. I think that, especially as you see the different platforms really proliferate, with Daydream now coming on board, and with all the stuff that's happening at Oculus and PlayStation. I think once you see that adoption really start to roll out, I think you'll see a lot more investment. And it's a great time to be a VR content maker. Content is the oxygen that fuels all of these platforms. So it's a great time to be in the business.
The bold and the brave. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.